Hi, I'm Tara, and welcome to Let's Do Books. I am so excited because I'm joined today by Anna Burke, who is the author of Compass Rose, a dystopian novel that reads kind of like the exact future we're currently barreling towards, and her latest is Thorn, a lesbian retelling of Beauty and the Beast, which is actually one of my favorite books this year. If you haven't read it, you must, or I can't be friends with you. Both of these books are available everywhere from Bywater Books. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, how are you doing, Tara?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
So, you are here today to share your journey with lesbian fiction. Where did it begin for you?
Well, so I am 29, so I was born in that sweet spot where we were just beginning to get queer YA. So I would say that my journey definitely began there, and then I went to college and I was an English major, and I, read a lot of Virginia Woolf and Jeanette Winterson and Sarah Waters and kind of briefly forgot about lesbian fiction. And then I met my wife, who, when she was in the closet as a teenager, would order online from Bold Strokes Books and had this like secret book collection in her room. So, which is just
That's
adorable.
The cutest.
Mm-hmm. So she got me back into it, and that was like 2012, 2013.
Do you remember kind of what some of those first books were?
Like when I was a teenager or more recently?
Let's say both. One or two from each.
Okay, so obviously I think we've all read Annie on My Mind, which in retrospect I don't love, but at the time it was a big deal. When I was young, I also discovered Georgia Beers because I'm from Rochester, and so the Barnes & Noble like stocked all of her books. I was like, oh cool, this is exciting. And then when I got back into it, I devoured Anne McMahon and Catherine Friend. And I think my favorite Catherine Friends were her autobiographies. So my wife and I started a sheep farm when we first met. And I told her that she had to read these books or I would not date her.
Okay, I know we're talking about you as a reader, but why a sheep farm? I need to know.
I really like sheep. I've always sort of been very outdoorsy. I grew up on like a happy farm. We had goats and horses and chickens, and I just like sheep. I'm really not a cool person, so I think
cute,
they're
though.
adorable.
Sheep are so cute
and tasty. I just don't know what more you could want. Yeah,
They are tasty. I'm sorry to the vegans that might be listening. Yeah, I'm also. I mean, it's not a secret that I'm a big Anne McMahon fan, so that kind of makes my heart happy. We're kindred spirits.
Yeah, I think I've read everything she's written. And if I haven't, it's because she won't release her most recent manuscript to me yet.
That's just rude.
So rude.
You should ask her for it. I think it's ready.
Yeah, actually, I've read a little bit of it, and I'm really excited about it. So that's not really I may have just lied to you a little bit.
Do you have a favorite by her?
So whenever people ask me questions about, what's your favorite book, it's usually like the most recent thing that I've read, because that's what I'm thinking about. So I know that your favorite is Who's Your Daddy, right?
Mm-hmm. I actually don't think that's her best book. It's my favorite book.
Your favorite, okay.
But I think it's kind of a tie, but I think Backcast is her best book, with Goldenrod as a super close second. Like, they're so close to each other.
And I did enjoy Beowulf for Cousins. I thought that was just like fun and funny.
It's so cute. It's so cute. And if anybody hasn't read that book yet, it actually it won the Lammy this year. So it's definitely well worth checking out. So was there anything you were kind of reading when you started writing, or like what was it that kind of prompted you to get into writing?
I have always written. So for me, I don't really, when I saw that question, I was sort of thinking to myself, okay, how do I want to answer this? And basically, I'm usually reading the sort of thing that I'm writing at the time. So when I was a really cool preteen, I wrote like super nerdy Tamora Pierce spinoffs. And then when I was a really cool older person, so for instance, when I was working on Compass Rose, which is climate fiction, science fiction, very dystopian, terrifyingly realistic. When I was writing it, I didn't just have to read the news. Now I would just have to open New York Times and I'd get all the information I needed. But I, just tried to read as much of that genre as I could. And that way I knew sort of the context I was working within. And also, if you read something brilliant, it's inspiring. So, and then when I was working on Thorn and on the book I'm working on now, which are both sort of retold fairy tales, I, sort of looked and combed through as many retold fairy tales as I could, and I saw what I liked, what people had done really well, what I thought wasn't working, and just tried to pull from that.
That's really interesting, because it's kind of the opposite of what I hear from a lot of authors who say they cannot read within the same genre that they're writing when they're writing because they're afraid of bleed through. What do you think about that? Is that something you're ever concerned about that when you're writing?
So I do have concerns about something within that vein. So if I'm in, right now, for instance, I'm in the death throes of editing Nottingham. And I am trying really hard not to pollute my brain with anything that I don't want to bleed through, and that means TV. I'm trying to just keep it where I'm in the writing space that I need to be. And as far as I read so much that I don't worry, and I'm usually reading a book and listening to a book and then reading something else. So if it were to bleed through, it would bleed through in such a jumble.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Were there any, as you were writing your books, were there any kind of within those genres that stood out for you as really excellent?
Yeah. So I am a huge Robin McKinley fan. She did a lot of retold fairy tales, and so definitely that was what made me want to write that, because I remember when I was reading them, I was thinking, this really resonates with me, but there's something missing, and I wanted to see people like myself within those stories. So that, and that I think is really inspiring for a lot of writers, not so much what you're reading, but what you're not reading. And so if you don't find the book that you want to read, then, there is a way to fix that, right? It's just to write your own. So when I was writing Compass Rose, I was also really inspired by Belinda Lowe. I love her YA fairy tales. I think they're just beautiful, just so lyrical, so sweet. And I also, when I was working on Compass Rose, I had just discovered an author called Cameron Hurley. She's mainstream. She writes pretty gritty sci-fi. She's, won a bunch of awards. And she wrote a book called The Stars Are Legion, which in Spanish was translated to Lesbians in Space. Which is basically a accurate synopsis, sort of. I mean, it definitely simplifies the concept, but I remember thinking that one of the things that hadn't resonated for me with a lot of the lesbian fiction I had read was I wanted it to be not darker, but kind of grittier. I wanted something different, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And then I read some of her work, and I read the Kushiel's Dart series by Jacqueline Carey, which I have mixed feelings about, but love. I don't know if you're familiar with them. And so I remember reading those and thinking, I love this whole, enemies to lovers trope, but also I want to do it differently. And I didn't end up doing it a whole lot differently, but that was the inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of your books are pretty gritty. I know Sheena, who runs the Lesbian Review, I read Thorn, it must have been January, because I think that's when it came out. Yeah, Salem sent it to me, and she's like, this is brilliant. And okay, I mean, she's the publisher. She has to say that about the books that they put out. And then I read it, and I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. I was like, Sheena, you have to read this book. And then she read it, and she said, you liked this book? You? You like puppies and unicorns and things. And I was like, but it's so good. And I think I liked, I've seen different retellings of Beauty and the Beast, and, they're often, quite cute, and there's, that was also probably my favorite Disney movie when I was a tween, because it hit at exactly the right time for me. That was when it came out, and I read it, and I was like, yeah, no, there's nothing dancing in this book. But it is hard to find books that kind of occupy that space within our genre. So I think it was really refreshing to see that come in. I'm going to stop because I realized I was about to go into like a full-on fangirl about how you wrote it.
I mean, feel free. I'm listening.
Yeah, I'm sure, right? I wrote it down. It's in a review. No, I don't know. I liked the shifting between the two perspectives and some of the lyricism and some of the whatever. But we're not here to talk about what I think. We're here to talk about you and your books. And you actually have some favorite books that you want to share with listeners.
Yeah, definitely. Before that, I do want to say that I also enjoy a good puppy and kitten romance. I recently devoured Melissa Braden's Seven Shore series, loved it. So, it depends on my mood, whether I want to kill off all my characters or if I want them to be happy.
Have you read Marriage of Inconvenience by Chelsea M. Cameron?
No, should I?
Save it for when you want the fluffiest of books. It's one that I have not been able to shut up about. It was one of my favorites last year, and it's a fake relationship, friends to lovers, and it's like fake relationship for the case of getting an inheritance.
Oh.
And it's best friends.
Okay.
It is the cutest. There is no angst whatsoever. So when you like hit your ultimate despair at what's happening in the news, it's the perfect time to pick up that book.
So yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For people listening, we're recording this in August when there have been a lot more stories about the fires in the Amazon, which I know have been plunging me into some pits of despair. So yes, it's a perfect day.
It's okay though, because we're being led by the Messiah.
Jesus Christ. Speaking of...
I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, books. Favorite books.
You're listening to the Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
So I have at this point read and listened to what I think is my favorite book ever. And I just discovered it. It is called This Is How You Lose the Time War. And I don't know the best way to describe it is a science fiction, time travel, spy, romance, half epistolary novel between two really badass women. But that also, like, every word is poetry. It is so fucking beautiful. I am obsessed with it. Everyone needs to read it so I can talk about it more. Because right now I keep saying, have you read this? And everyone says no, and I get sad. So it's incredible. So This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Mohtar. So definitely like one of my favorite books ever. I also just listened to Of Fire and Stars, which is this adorable YA fantasy book. It was put out, I don't know if it's an imprint of Macmillan, by Audrey Coulthurst. And it made my like inner horse girl wanted to be a knight. Like, oh God, it was just so sweet. And the sequel just came out, I want to say this month. So good time to read it if you like YA. I already talked about The Stars Are Legion / Lesbians in Space. We already talked about Beowulf for Cutting. So definitely, okay, Spanish Surrender. I love Rachel Spangler's new like travel romance thing she's got going on. I loved Full English, and I really enjoyed Spanish Surrender. I thought it was sexy, funny, timely, and she just writes about food in a way that made me like perpetually hungry, which it was like I mean, that could be a mixed blessing depending on where you are and how much is in your pantry and if you have chocolate or not. So
did you read Perfect Pairing yet then?
Yes. And I still haven't gotten over the cheese. And I feel like I now make very inferior grilled cheeses.
I suspect everybody does. Yeah, for people who are listening who don't know anything about Perfect Pairing, it's about somebody who has a grilled cheese food truck business. I don't even eat cheese, which I know is like unbelievable to some people, but I still like, she had me at food truck owner.
Yeah.
I think it might be the only one in Lesfic.
I mean, I definitely would defer to your judgment there, but maybe that's a whole niche we're going to start seeing. I'm gonna have to do some in-depth research first and go to a lot of different food trucks. I'll get back to you on that.
I look forward to reading it.
And then also I have to mention 2 Degrees by Bev Prescott, because I think it's one of the, well, no, who else just put out, there are a couple of climate romances that just, or not climate fiction, lesfic books that just came out, but definitely I love all the science in 2 Degrees, and I think that it's a very timely story, although it's hard. I'm sort of been working on the sequel to Compass Rose, and I've been struggling because of everything that's going on right now. It's just really hard to keep the perspective between fiction and then our reality. But anyway, yeah.
Have you read The Tiger Flu by Larissa Lai?
It's on my reading list. It was actually, that was part of my summer reading list, and my summer got totally derailed because I got a concussion in April, and I've only recently, like the past month, been cleared to read in short increments. So my audiobook backlist is pretty long.
And I don't think that one's available in audio because it's put out by a small Canadian press. She lives in the same city I do. She's a professor at the University of Calgary. And so I know some people that know her, and when I read it, like, that book is just like a 100% mindfuck. It's so good, but it drops you into the world. Nothing is ever explained at all. And so
I love that.
I think it took until about halfway through the book where things started clicking, and I started to understand, like, what was going on, the politics, who people were, all of that. And so I had to, like, go back to the beginning and just kind of read again, because it's so, like, it's really highly immersive. And it also just feels very Canadian, because there's a thing with Canadian literature where it often gets almost poetic. Like, even in the prose, you'll get that kind of wordplay and poetry, and it's a deep part of Canadian literature's tradition is wordplay. And so she does a lot with that. That's really brilliant. But at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, no, this is another possible future we're heading towards. It's all a nightmare. Everything's a nightmare.
That's okay. That's why we have books.
Right?
No, I'll bump that up on my reading list, because I have a couple of friends who have just raved about it.
But it's not, like I said, it's not a book that guides the reader along. I feel like it's a book that doesn't actually care what the reader thinks, which is, I'm not sure how to put it other than that, but I think is a really kind of a brave and audacious way to do a project like that. Do you have any other books that you would want to give a shout out to, that you're excited about, that you think people should be picking up and not enough people are reading it yet?
Oh my god, so many books. Let's see. I don't even want to single out. There are a bunch of books that I'm really excited about that are coming out soon. But as far as books that are out right now, as I said, my backed up reading list is insane. So I was excited about Priory of the Orange Tree, which I haven't had a chance to get into yet. Miranda in Milan is a novella. It's a queer novella. It's like a retelling of The Tempest. And I was on my way to get that from the library when I got in my car accident. So I own it.
Oh no.
I haven't read it yet. What else? I haven't had a chance to read Melissa Braden's new one, which it's on hold. I read a lot of my books to the library right now because I'm a grad student and my book budget is pretty limited. So I'm like constantly recommending books to my library. They probably hate me.
Have you heard about Olivia Waite's book, The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics?
One of my friends, I just yelled at her today because she's not reading This Is How You Lose the Time War. She is reading The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics, which is not what I told her to do. But
I've heard it's very good. I haven't read it yet. It's on my list. I'm going to read it very soon. Actually, by the time this podcast is up, I will have read it. And
you will probably have written a review, and I can read the review, and then
absolutely.
I can read the book.
I mean, if you're into the idea of a historical romance with like really smart, sciencey women,
who isn't? I mean, maybe people aren't. I'm not going to judge people based on what they're not into. But
no, that's true. That's not fair. I was going to joke that I would, but it's like, no, I actually won't. That's not nice. So, is there anything else that you would want to share with people about your journey and experiences as a reader?
As a reader, I don't know. I mean, books are incredible, right?
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of thinking about that recently, especially as I've been trying to figure out ways to stay sane. And books are definitely playing a huge part of that. So I just think that we're really lucky, especially now that we have all these stories within lesfic, but also just in general. I think we're seeing this huge explosion of diversity in every level. And I'm not just talking about like the various minority groups that we fall into, but we're seeing characters who are allowed to be themselves and express themselves in ways that we really haven't seen before. And I think that's particularly true with how women are being represented, but also I think we're starting to see some male characters that don't fall into this toxic masculinity trope, and I think that is phenomenal. And I'm a huge believer in not writing utopias, obviously. If you've read my work, you know that, but that we can write our way into a kinder world, even if we can't necessarily write our way into a better world. And I think that if we start to intellectualize that, we take it in and then it affects our subconscious, and basically it's like not the lesbian agenda, but it's this like subversive agenda where we maybe get people to, I don't know, care about each other a little bit.
Where can people find you online if they would like to connect with you?
I have really made an effort recently to be on social media, so they can find me on Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook. I just started a Patreon account. I think I'm going to do some fun things there. Yeah, I also just launched the newsletter. I haven't released one yet, so if you sign up now, you'll be one of the first. And that link is on my website, as well as I think most of my social media handles. And my website is annahburke.com, and my Twitter and Instagram are Anna Burke Author.
I'm trying to remember if I've signed up for your newsletter. I saw you and Karen Callmaker talking about when you were setting it up.
More like Karen talking me out of a deep pit of despair.
Aww. I bet you did awesome, and she's lovely, and if I haven't signed up, I'm going to make sure and do it, and everybody else should too. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much, Anna, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun, and now I have new books to read.
I'm Tara, and you've been listening to Les Do Books. You can email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with your questions or comments. If you're an author who's interested in joining me on the show to talk about the lesfic you love or trends that have you interested, please let me know. If you've enjoyed this episode, please check out the show notes where you'll find a Patreon link for The Lesbian Talk Show, or visit patreon.com/thelesbiantalkshow. Patrons get exclusive content like bonus podcasts, author interviews, and stuff like that no one else gets access to. To find this and many other great shows, all you need to do is search for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or Spotify.